to unblind the trials after 2 months and vaccinate the placebo group is nothing less than a public health scandal. Everyone involved failed in their duty to the truth. But no one cares, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The one place that can help us understand exactly what caused this is Australia. Australia had almost no COVID when vaccines were first introduced, making them the perfect control group. The state of South Australia had only 1,000 cases of COVID across its whole population by December 2021, before Omicron arrived. What was the impact of vaccination there? For 15 to 44-year-olds, there was historically 1,300 emergency cardiac presentations a month. With vaccine rollout in the under 50s, this rocketed to 2,172 cases in November 2021 in this age group alone, a 67% more than usual. Overall, there were 17,900 South Australians who had a cardiac emergency in 2021, compared to only 13,250 in 2018, a 35% increase. It is clearly the vaccine that must be the number one suspect in this, and it cannot be dismissed as just a coincidence. Australian mortality overall has increased from early 2021, and the increase is due to cardiac deaths. These excess deaths are not due to an ageing population, because there are fewer deaths in the diseases of old age. These deaths are not an effect of COVID because they've happened in places where COVID had not reached. And they're not due to low statin prescriptions or undertreated hypertension, as Chris Whitty would suggest, because prescriptions did not change, and any effect would have taken many years and been very small. The prime suspect must be something that was introduced to the population as a whole, something novel. The prime hypothesis must be the experimental COVID-19 vaccines. The ONS published a data set of deaths by vaccinated and unvaccinated. At first glance, it appears to show that the vaccines are safe and effective. However, there were several huge problems with how they presented that data. One was that for the first 3-week period after injection, the ONS claimed there were only a tiny number of deaths, the number the ONS would normally predict to occur in a single week. Where were the deaths from the usual causes? When this was raised, the ONS claimed that the sickest people did not get vaccinated, and therefore people were taking the vaccination were self-selecting for those least likely to die. Not only is this not the case in the real world, with even hospices heavily vaccinating their residents, but the ONS's own data showed that the proportion of sickest people was equal in the vaccinated and unvaccinated groups. This inevitably raises serious questions about the ONS's data presentation. There were so many problems with the methodology used by the ONS that the statistics regulator agreed that the ONS data could not be used to assess vaccine efficacy or safety. That tells you something about the ONS. Consequently, Hart asked the UK Health Security Agency to provide the data they had on people who had died and therefore needed to be removed from their vaccination data set. This request has been repeatedly refused, with excuses given, including the false claim that anonymising this data will be equivalent to creating it, even though there is case law that anonymisation is not considered creation of new data. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I believe if this data was released, it would be damning. Some claim that so many lives have been saved by mass vaccination that any amount of harm, suffering and death caused by the vaccines is a price worth paying. They're delusional, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The claim of 20 million lives saved is based on now discredited models which assume that COVID waves do not peak without intervention. There have been numerous waves globally that now demonstrate that is not the case, and it was also based on there having been more than 500,000 lives saved in the UK. That's more than the worst case scenario predicted at the beginning of the pandemic. For the claim to have been true, the rate at which COVID killed people will have to have taken off dramatically at the beginning of 2021 in the absence of vaccination. This is ludicrous, and it bears no relationship to the truth. In the real world, Australia, New Zealand and South Korea had a mortality rate of 400 deaths per million up to the summer of 2022, after they were first hit with Omicron. So how does that compare? With the Wuhan strain, France and Europe as a whole had a mortality rate of under 400 deaths per million up to the summer of 2020. Australia, New Zealand and South Korea were all heavily vaccinated before infection. So tell me, where was the benefit? The UK had just over 800 deaths per million up to the summer of 2020, so twice as much. But we know that Omicron is half as deadly as the Wuhan variant. The death rates per million are the same before and after vaccination, So where was the benefits of vaccination? The regulators have failed in their duty to protect the public. They've allowed these novel products to skip crucial safety testing by letting them be described as vaccines. They've failed to insist on safety testing being done in the years since the first temporary emergency authorisation. Even now, no one can tell you how much spike protein is produced on vaccination and for how long. Yet another example of where there is no data for me to share with the House. And when it comes to properly recording deaths due to vaccination, the system's broken. Not a single doctor registered a death from a rare brain pot before doctors in Scandinavia forced the issue and the MHRA acknowledged the problem. Only then did these deaths start to be certified by doctors in the UK. It turns out that doctors were waiting for permission from the regulator and the regulator was waiting to be alerted by the doctors. This is a lethal circularity. Furthermore, coroners have written Regulation 28 reports highlighting deaths from vaccination to prevent further deaths, yet the MHRA said in a response to an FOI that they had not received any of them. The system we have in place is clearly not functioning to protect the public. The regulators also missed the fact that in the Pfizer trial, the vaccine was made for the trial participants in a highly controlled environment, in stark contrast to the manufacturing process used for the public rollout, which was based on a completely different technology. And just over 200 participants were given the same product that was given to the public. But not only was the data from these people never compared to those in the trial for efficacy and safety, but the MHRA have admitted that they dropped the requirement to provide the data. That means there was never a trial on the Pfizer product that was actually rolled out to the public. And that product has never been compared to the product that was actually trialled. The vaccine mass production processes use vats of Escherichia coli and present a risk of contamination with DNA from the bacteria as well as bacterial cell walls, which can cause dangerous reactions. This is not theoretical, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is now sound evidence that's been replicated by several labs across the world, and the mRNA vaccines were contaminated by DNA which far exceeded the usual permissible levels. Given that this DNA is enclosed in lipid nanoparticle delivery system, it's arguable that even the permissible levels have been far too high. These lipid nanoparticles are known to enter every organ of the body, as well as this potentially causing some of the acute adverse reactions seen. There is a serious risk of this foreign bacterial DNA inserting itself into human DNA. And will anybody investigate? No, they won't. I'll give way on that point.
We're conscious that time is tight. I recognise that Honourable Gentleman is making a very, very powerful case. Does he agree with me that the government should be looking at this properly and should commission a review into the excess deaths, partly so that we can reassure our constituents that the case he's making is not in fact valid and that the vaccines have no cause behind these excess deaths?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his support on this topic, and of course that is what exactly any responsible government should do. I wrote to the Prime Minister on the 7th of August 2023 with all the evidence of this, but sadly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I still await a response. What will it take to stop these products? Their complete failure to stop infection was not enough, and we all know plenty of vaccinated people who've caught and spread COVID. The mutation of the virus to a weaker variant, Omicron, that wasn't enough. The increasing evidence of the serious harms to those of us that were vaccinated, that's not enough. And now the cardiac deaths and the deaths of young people is apparently not enough either. It's high time these experimental vaccines were suspended and a full investigation into the harms they've caused initiated. History will be a harsh judge if we don't start using evidence-based medicine. We need to return to basic science, basic ethics immediately, which means listening to all voices and investigating all concerns. In conclusion, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the experimental COVID-19 vaccines are not safe and they're not effective. Despite there only being limited interest in the chamber from colleagues, I'm very grateful for those who have attended. We can see from the public gallery there is considerable public interest. I would implore all members of the House, present and those not, support calls for a 3-hour debate on this important issue. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, this might be the first debate on excess deaths in our Parliament. Indeed, it might be the first debate on excess deaths in the world, but very sadly, I promise you, won't be the last.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for North West Leicestershire for securing this important debate. I do only have 5 minutes of the 30-minute debate to respond, so I will try and cover all the points if I can. Can I start
The people have spoken.
He is correct.
The people are speaking.
An increase in excess deaths in the last year. However, his analysis is something I will disagree with, because the causes that he refers to are simply do not bear to the statistics that we have. There have been a combination of factors contributing to the increase in excess deaths, including in the last year high flu prevalence, the ongoing challenges of COVID-19. We had the Strep A outbreak, and conditions such as heart disease, which you touched on, diabetes and cancer, because we had virtually a lockdown of routine health services over a 2-year period. Many of those are now coming forward with increased morbidity and mortality as a result of that. And starting with winter flu, the number of positive tests last year peaked at 31.8%, the highest seen in the last 6 years. And interim analysis from the UK HSA indicated the number of deaths in England associated with flu was far higher than pre-pandemic levels. So excess deaths due to flu last winter is sadly part of the answer. And he touched on the independent body of the ONS. Well, their figures show that the leading cause of death in England is still dementia, which accounts for about 10% of all deaths. But they do also look at the cause of excess deaths. And if you look at the figures as of June this year, the top 3 causes of excess deaths are respiratory illnesses, dementia, and ischemic heart disease, which is often caused by an increase in cholesterol, smoking, not having a blood pressure check. So there's a number of reasons, and they're often chronic conditions that people have had for years, decades in fact. Some people are not acute illnesses.
What about his
now,
evidence?
just to touch on some of the points that he has made in his points in the 3 minutes I have left to respond. Firstly, turning to the importance of vaccination, I think it's very easy to say that there's a prevalence of high rates of COVID vaccination in people who have died, and that is correct. When 93.6% of your population has had at least 1 dose of the vaccine, there will be a high rate of vaccination in excess deaths. That is different to causality. I completely agree with them. There's a high prevalence rate. That is not the same as saying that is the cause of those deaths. And the Office for National Statistics has looked that actually those who've been vaccinated generally had a lower all-cause mortality rate than the unvaccinated people since the booster introduction in 2021. And a recent study in Singapore actually found that when they looked at patients who recovered from COVID who were unvaccinated, they showed an increased risk of by 56% more to be at risk of cardiac complications a year later compared to those who were vaccinated. So there is conflicting data on this, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with him, but I think we need to have a robust conversation on this and not to assume that one side necessarily has all the answers. Now, just to touch on a couple of points that he made around vaccine safety. Now, the regulator has been taking account of those who have got adverse events, and I would encourage anyone who's had a side effect from any of the vaccines to use the yellow card system, to report it to their GP, because when they have been reported, the MHRA has taken action. If you look in April 21, the MHRA reacted to rare cases of concurrent thrombosis and thrombocytopenia following the AZ vaccine, which resulted in adults under 30 not being offered that vaccine. And in May 21, that was increased to the adults under 40, and particularly to the mRNA vaccine in June 21, following reports of a link between COVID vaccines and myocarditis. The Commission on Human Medicines conducted an independent review which found the incidence of this side effect was rare, but it was between 1 and 2 cases per 100,000. So when there are concerns, absolutely we must investigate those. There is no doubt about it. And for those that have experienced rare side effects from the vaccine, we had a debate earlier this afternoon about that. We do have the Vaccine Damage Payment Scheme, which offers a payment of $120,000 if that is one show to be
11 million paid out so far.
I'm terribly sorry. The House stands adjourned.